Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome to the third episode of Houdini from scratch. So today we're going to be talking about procedural modeling. And the term procedural is so used when it comes to Houdini, and everyone keeps saying proceduralism, procedural design. How can we keep something procedural? And today we're going to be talking about this term, what it means, how can we make something procedural? What exactly do we mean when we say proceduralism? Also, before I start, I should point out that sometimes my camera freaks out. So if that happens, I do apologize for it. I actually already recorded, I think about 5 or 10 minutes, but then I noticed that my camera had frozen. So I just decided to re-record that section. It wasn't worth it. But yeah, if you saw that there's like this weird colorful thing happening on the bottom corner, if I notice it, I'm gonna fix it, but if I don't, I guess it's just gonna be there. So yeah, that's how it goes. But yeah, talking about Houdini and proceduralism. So what exactly do we mean when we say something is procedural? So a very basic example of proceduralism would be imagining two objects. So on my left hand, I have a sphere, and on my right hand, I have a box. So I want this sphere to move whenever I move this box. So I bring the box in here. I want the sphere to follow. This is technically a procedural operation because our sphere is bound to this box. So in a way, thinking about a character and a rig is also kind of procedural, because when you move these joints, the character is actually going to move around. It's going to wave, it's going to walk. And that's a procedure. In fact, let's just look at it in a more general way. All of these softwares, all these programs, whether we're working with Houdini, whether it's Maya, Cinema 4D, or even Blender, all these programs are procedural. They have parameters. We are changing a parameter, and we're noticing something on the screen. Even Windows or any other operating systems, they're all procedural because there are parameters, and when we move something, this program will see this and will translate this into data, and then it will use the data to actually do something. So for example, in Houdini, when we move something, we're gonna notice it on the screen. So for example, when I transform an object, I'm gonna see it. I have a parameter that I'm playing with, and then I see it in the viewport. This is still a procedural operation. So every program is procedural. It's just that how we're gonna use it, and it's that how we use our data, what we have, because the program on its own is actually doing a procedure. It's just as easy as that. But when we make things follow each other, when we come up with rules for the movement, for the animation, for the design itself, when we come up with a recipe for our design, that's when we're making things procedural. So for example, I can imagine a cook. So my program is a chef, and for example, Houdini is a chef, and this chef is trying to cook some food. And we, as the users, we are the ones that, we're not the chef. We're the ones that are actually writing the cookbook. So we come up with recipes, we write them down, we give details, and then we give this book to the chef. So the chef is just gonna look it up, is gonna see the recipe, and is gonna do it. So if we come up with the wrong recipe, we're gonna see the wrong food. Something is gonna be wrong with it. And the more accurate we are when we're defining our recipe, the better the end results is going to be. And that's pretty logical, I think. So today what we're going to be doing is, first we're going to do a practice example where we're going to be talking about a little bit of math, and then we're going to actually design a scene. It's probably going to be the first scene that we officially do in this course, and it's actually going to be the burger, which we saw in the thumbnail. Recently, I was invited to my old university, AUI in Isfahan, my hometown, and I did an online presentation where I talked about Houdini, And the burger was actually one of the examples that I used. In fact, this whole chef thing was also one of the examples that I used. And I thought it would be easy to kind of use the same examples for just this course. So if you have the scene files, which as always are available at my Gumroad page, you can just download them and follow along there. Or you can just start from scratch, which is the name of the course. So, and that's what I'm going to be doing. The scene files actually contain materials for the burger. They come with textures, which, by the way, we're not really using in the thumbnail, but I did include a couple of textures files, which I got from Polyhaven, so I'm actually allowed to share them since they're in the public domain. But I still think you should check out the website. They have great textures there and HDRIs. And I'm just, I included the materials in the scene file as well, but I'm not going to be talking about the rendering. Rendering needs its own separate session, and we're probably going to talk about rendering in Redshift since it's my favorite engine, but we might also talk about some other engines as well. Also, the materials in this scene file are set up for Redshift, but feel free to just do them from scratch for another engine if you want. But yeah, if you download the scene files, you actually get those. But the rest of it, I'm probably gonna just create everything from scratch as we go forward. There might be some differences because, you know, it's just a tutorial, so I don't have that much time to go over everything and just figure out everything the exact same way as I have for my own scene file, but it's still gonna be pretty close. Okay, enough talking about this kind of stuff. Let's just move on to the actual tutorial. Before doing that, however, I want to fix my UI. As I've mentioned, I don't like build. I like to have a simpler view, so I close all of these guys, close all these tabs there. I have to check my second screen from time to time to make sure my face is still there. And I'm just gonna hit P to get this parameter window. If I put down, hit tab and put down a geonode, I can actually see my parameters. So it's a little difficult to actually like keep adding, bringing up this UI, changing the build. So what you can do is actually click here and save the current desktop as, and in this case, I'm gonna call it tutorial and save. All right, and it's saving it as tutorial 2 because I actually already have tutorial, which is the same thing. And now we have this UI, so every time we open Houdini, we can just pick tutorial, but that one is also not the best. So if you go to Edit and Preferences and General User Interface, you can actually load the desktop that you want to see by default. It's going to be on build. I have a quad, which is the one I like, and it's just the same thing with an extra panel. And we can just pick tutorial, so every time it's going to load this particular desktop. Whatever you end up calling your desktop, it's going to be the name that you see there. All right, so let's jump into Geo. And what we're going to be doing today is very, very simple. And we kind of did the same thing in the last session, but this one is going to be very different. So what I want to do is I want to have a sphere, and then I want to have a torus. And I want my sphere to sit on my torus, and that's it. So as you can see, we actually did the same thing in the last session. But what I want to do now is I really want to adjust it. And I want to explore some expressions in Houdini. Or as Houdini likes to call it, HScript. I'm not going to get too deep into what HScript is. And you might have heard about Vex and the differences. Just know that when you're working with Vex, you're working with a wrangle. And you're doing everything inside this expression, and everything stays there, and you can just bring data. You can do so much here, it's just crazy. But with expressions, we're actually just using all these parameters in here, and we're just usually typing one line. In fact, we're always just typing one line in here. If it's more than one line, we're gonna use a wrangle. And HScript is simpler. We don't have all of these functions that we have in Vex, but it's a good way of starting Houdini, and then we're gonna move on to Vex probably somewhere in the future, not right now. Don't worry about it. But yeah, we're gonna be adjusting our parameters. So what I'm trying to do, what my goal is today, is that I want the sphere to go sit inside, and I want it to be adjustable whenever I move my torus, or if I move the, for example, if I change the radius of this torus, and I have all these controls in here, so I can just make it bigger, make it smaller. I want my sphere to actually adjust. So let me bring up the scene to actually show you what I mean. And essentially, this is what we're trying to do. I want my sphere to sit on this torus, and I want to be able to adjust everything like this. As you can see, it's following until it actually does this. There we go. So we set to 0 and we cannot really see it anymore. I can also adjust the big radius, and as you can see, the sphere is falling inside until it actually hits the middle ground. So it's just gonna stay there. But yeah, this is what we're trying to make. The reason why I picked this one is because I wanted to make sure we cover some basic H script, and we also talk about some basic math, because I think it's very useful. Don't worry, I'm gonna explain things, and chances are you're probably familiar with the concepts, but I'm still gonna show you the stuff. And yeah, that's what we're trying to make today, especially in the first section. So let me adjust everything on my second monitor so I can still see my recording. I want to make sure everything is working here. Pretty good. And all right, so let's adjust things. I have sphere, I have torus. I want to have a control, so I'll just add a null, and the null, as you can see, is empty, and I want to use this null as my control because I don't want to go to all these different objects to control these parameters. I just want everything to be sitting in here. And now we're gonna see a new concept which we haven't talked about before, and it's copying parameters and pasting relative references. So let's do that real quick. Now in here in my sphere, I have a radius. So if I hover over radius, I can actually see that it says parameters are called rad x, rad y, and rad z. So this is x, this is y, and this is z. I can check that if I want, but just coming here and think copy parameters, and then, for example, coming to the center and then say paste relative reference. And as you can see, and the 0 is actually shouldn't be there. So it says channel rad x. So this is a channel, and I'm reading the radius x. And as you can see, my radius, my center moved. If I click here, I can actually see that it says 1. If I start scrolling in here, which is an easy way of adjusting parameters, I can actually see that this particular value here is moving with it. So I'm reading the radius x, and I'm just putting it in center. So 2.3, 2.4, 2.9, and everything is adjusting. In fact, you could just copy the whole parameter, so all 3 of them, and just paste it in center. And as you can see now, as I'm adjusting things are moving around. So this is being controlled by rad x, this one is being controlled by rad y, and this one is being controlled by rad z. All right, if I hit Control Shift and left click, I'm actually clearing it. It's similar to clearing animation and keyframes. So I'm just gonna set these to be 0, or I'm just gonna right click and hit revert to defaults, or Control middle mouse button. So start using Control middle mouse button because it's great. Very good shortcut. So very basic stuff. We just right now we know that we can use these values to drive something else. Let's start expanding on this. So I want this center is actually my position. So if I bring this up, you can see that I'm bringing my sphere up. So I'm gonna come to the viewport and hit enter to actually get these handles, and I'm just gonna move it down, move it to this side, -x, and then I'm just gonna merge these two together, so I can see both of them at the same time. So what I'm gonna do, as I suggested before, I'm gonna move my sphere, and I want to see my torus moving up and down right now. Okay, pretty simple. I'm gonna come here. The only thing I care about is movement in the y direction. So I'm just gonna come to my sphere, right click, hit copy parameter, go to my torus, and I also have the center, which I can use for moving things. So if I paste that value in here, paste relative reference, don't hit Control V or don't just paste things. You need to actually paste the relative reference. So now, as you can see, it says channel brackets // sphere 1 / ty. So let's decipher this. What does this thing actually mean? It means that look at yourself. This is a note. So look at yourself, and then we have .. So it means look outside yourself. You're not working with your own parameters. In fact, if I just copy this 0.5 and paste it in here, I can see that it only says channel radx because we're just exploring ourselves. This is what we have on this particular node. So it doesn't have to look anywhere else for it. Channel radx. But I'm trying to look at a channel on another node. So .. / means look outside. If I'm looking for something in this obj level, which is one level outside, and then look another level outside, I actually need to say .. /.. which means look outside yourself and then look outside the current container that you're in. If you're doing even something inside another level, you have to also put down another .. It's a pretty simple concept, but I want to make sure it's easy to understand. So it says look at sphere 1, which is the name of our node. In fact, if I rename this to something weird, it's actually going to rename that in here as well. Houdini automatically actually does that, so which is great. So you don't need to worry about renaming things. The only time this will not be a thing is when you're working actually inside Vex, but we're not doing Vex right now, so no need to worry. And then the next one is a /ty. So ty stands for translation y. So, but how do I know it? Because if you go to sphere and look at the center, you can actually see that it's called parameters, and they're called tx, ty, and tz. It's as simple as that. This is tx, this is ty, and this is tz. So if you remember, this is radx, rady, radz, tx, ty, tz, and then we have rotate, and it's called rx, ry, rz. So it's really simple, and most of the time they're universal. So even inside, for example, a box, you still have the same parameters. You have center, and then you have size, which is not a radius, so you have size x, size y, and size z. It's pretty much the same thing, but in a sphere we actually have a radius. In a box we don't have a radius, we have a size. Most of the time they're also going to have some sort of relationship with the title in here. Obviously they don't have that with center, but rotate is r, size is the same thing, uniform scale is scale. So it's pretty simple. And even like a transform node also has that. So we have tx, ty, tz, we have rx, ry, rz, and then we have sx, sy, sz. So if you're trying to reference these parameters, it's pretty easy to do it like this. Right, and then as I said, you're just copying it and pasting it. The only reason this one matters is because we want to make sure where this thing is coming from. And one tip for Houdini is that if you go to this view and hit show for selected nodes in the dependency links, if you click on your actual node, you can actually see this arrow coming from the original node. So it even makes it easier to follow where our dependencies are coming from. You can just select torus and see, oh yeah, this is coming from that node. You hit a sphere, you're also going to see that. If you click outside, if you click on any other nodes, you're not going to see. But each one of these nodes is actually, when you click on them, it's going to show you that either they have dependencies coming in or they are sending something somewhere else. I like to keep this on show for selected, but you can actually hit this show for all nodes, and now this way it will always be there, no matter if I'm clicking on it or not. You can use it like this, but sometimes things get crazy. For example, one simple example of doing this is with my staircase generator, which I've been working on for my architecture toolset. And if I jump inside, this is going to be so crazy. As you can see, there are so many dependencies going on, which makes things super difficult to understand. But with this show for selected nodes, it's actually much cleaner. I mean, it's still pretty messy, but now whenever you select something, now you're going to see the whole mess. So it just makes things a little bit easier. All right, so we talked about these parameters and pasting the relative references. But now what I want to do is actually I want to create my own parameters, and I want to have my own control system, and I want to use my values to drive maybe both of these. It's not going to be anything too advanced, but I just want to have some control. So I'm going to zero this center and just put it here back at 0, 0, 0. And I'm going to go to this control node that I made with my null and hit this gear and edit parameter interface. This is something that we do in Houdini like all the time whenever we're trying to adjust something, so you should get used to it. And you have all these data types in here on the left side. What we currently need is pretty easy. We have a radius, and each one of them is a value. And one thing that I note is that I always want this thing to stay a sphere, so I don't need to essentially create 3 values for controlling the radius. I just need 1. So I'm gonna come here and pick float. Now we're gonna be talking about floats, vectors, integers later on, but for the time being, just know that float is just 1 value and it can be decimal, and most of the time we're using floats for adjusting things. In fact, all these other variables here, they are also from the float type, and you can actually see that if you go for example to a sphere and hit this gear icon. Now they're going to be locked, so you can't adjust them, but for example our uniform scale is actually a float, and you can see it in here. You can't change it because this is something for Houdini. You shouldn't break it, but you could actually bring your own parameters, just drag and drop them here, for example on root, and it will be added down there. And I'm just going to call it my underline parameter, and for a label I'm also going to call it parameter. And then when I hit apply and accept, I'm actually going to see that parameter down there. Now it's not doing anything at the moment, but it exists on my sphere, so I'm just going to hit gear icon and just remove that parameter because I don't need it. Hit apply and then accept. All right, so I'm trying to get parameters on this control node. That's the whole reason why this control exists, because I just want to see all these parameters at the same time. I want to be able to control the radius of the sphere in one place. I want to be able to control the radius of the torus in one place. I just want all of them to be at the same place. It just makes it a little bit easier. So we brought this float to the right side and we're putting it down there. I actually don't need these two, so I'm just gonna select both of them by holding down shift and hit invisible and then apply. So I can see that that one just is hidden now, and I'm only seeing label, which is the new one I made. And if you hit this show invisible parameters, you can actually see what's invisible, but we don't need that. We're just trying to create our control. And now I'm just gonna hit click on this label and then change the name to the radius, for example, or an even better name would be rad underline, for example, sphere. And then I'm just gonna this would be the actual name of the parameters, and then for myself when I'm trying to look at it, I'm just gonna call it sphere radius and hit apply. So now as you can see, sphere radius is showing up in here, and when I hover over it, it's gonna say parameter's name is actually called rad underline sphere. So I want this thing, this value, to control the radius of my sphere. So I'm just gonna come here, I'm gonna copy this parameter, and then I'm gonna go to my sphere, and now I want that value to control the radius. So I can just paste it as a relative reference in here, and by default it will only paste it in the rad x section, even though we have several. So I have to come here and repeat the same thing and repeat the same thing, and as you can see, everything is gone. Did I do anything wrong? No, it's just that this parameter is now set to 0, so all these values are actually now equal to 0. So the only thing I need to do is just move this, and as you can see, I'm controlling everything with my null. Cool, I'm gonna set it to 0.5. Make things a little bit smaller. You could also just come to your sphere and hit this range, and now you can give a certain range to this particular object. So I know I'm probably not gonna go above 2, so I'm just gonna put it between 0 and 2. Also, I'm pretty sure I'm not gonna set it to 0, but you could just put it to 0.01, so that way even when you bring it down to a very small value, there's still gonna be a sphere there, but you don't have to do it like this. In fact, you can also lock it, so you can't actually go lower. Right now I forgot to hit apply, and as you can see, even when I'm trying to go down, it's not letting me. And when I scroll down, it's not doing that, and I hit 0 and hit enter, it's gonna be blink the red color, and then it's not gonna do it. And then if I go above 2, for example 5, it's also not gonna accept that. So this is when you can use this whenever you are trying to actually get specific values, but I don't want to do that. I want to be able to go above and below. I just don't want things to be by default. I just want this range, and it's just easier to just move things around and not worry about setting things to 0. In fact, I'm just going to set this to 0.1. So my smallest value is actually just going to be something that's still visible, but if I want, I can actually scroll down and go to the negative side. As you can see, my normals are reversed now, which means I'm in the negative section. If I hit control middle click, it's gonna reset it to the default value. So now you can see the default value is still 0. And the default value can actually be controlled. If you come here, scroll up, you can see that we have channels. And when you go there, you can actually see this guy. So this is the default value. And for myself, I know that I want the default value to be 0.5. So now when I hit control middle mouse button, it will always go back to the default value that I have there. It's just a control thing. You can even keep it at 0 and then just adjust it. But this makes it a little bit easier to control things. All right, we have our sphere. What is the next step? Well, I want to be able to control my torus. So we're going to do the same thing. Now, for my torus, I have a radius and I have a rad x. If I hover over here, I should be able to see the tip. I have rad x and rad y. So what I'm going to do, and I want to be able to control both of these guys. So I'm going to come here, and rather than just bringing one float, I want to bring 2 floats, and I want them to be kind of the same interface. So I have float vector 2. So a very simple way of doing this is saying that, hey, one float is just one slider. Float vector 2 is just 2 values, and float vector 3 is just 3 values. So, for example, vector 3 can be any arrows in space with x, y, and z, and you can imagine float vector 2 as something on the ground. It's 2D, so we only have x and y. Now, don't really get too deep on that because it's a wrong analogy, but for the time being, just know that when we're using a float vector 2, we are accessing something that has 2 parameters, 2 indices, and indice is the plural of index. So we have one index and we have the second index, and we're just using these 2 indices to control our object. So I'm gonna bring this thing over by clicking this arrow in here. You can also remove it, just drag it and paste it there. Both work. And I'm gonna call this one I called the other one rad sphere, so I'm gonna call this one rad underline torus. And for the label, I'm going to call it torus radius. And as before, I can actually see that by default it's 0.5 to 0.25 in the actual torus. So I'm going to give the same values in here. So in the channels, 0.5 and then 0.25, and then hit apply. Now, what I'm trying to do with control, I want to be able to control these 2 radiuses. So I'll select control, I'll copy my parameters in the torus radius. So I can do it individually for each one of these, but I can actually just copy the whole thing. And since in the destination I also have 2 parameters, I can just hit paste relative reference and it will do it for both of them. So if you remember, for the sphere, we actually had to do it individually because we were trying to control everything with just one slider, and we had to paste everything individually. But now, since what we have in here, the torus radius on our control object, has 2 indices, and the torus also has 2 in the radius, you can actually just paste the whole thing together. All right, so now if I put the visibility flag on the merge and go to my control, I can actually control both of these objects at the same time, which is very, very nice. Okay, control middle mouse button, and now we're setting everything to be 0. So you might think to yourself, well, in the last session we talked about putting things on top of each other. Why aren't you just selecting these, bringing a merge node, but rather than using the merge, actually using match size, which is the node we used in the previous session, and then hit minimum to be set to maximum of the second object, and then when we merge these together, it's sitting on top. And while you're technically right, it's on top of it, it's actually not sitting on it, because it's always gonna look at the boundary of this object. It's not understanding that there's a hole in the middle. And while you can adjust this by bringing this value down, when I actually end up making some changes in the radius, it's just gonna break. So what I'm trying to avoid is exactly what you're seeing right now. I'm trying to avoid setting it up like this. I actually want to control all of these parameters and link them all together. So very, very simple. We need to do some math. I'm sorry to say this, but you need math if you're trying to work with Houdini, and math can be difficult and math can be awful at first, but I do promise you this, when you actually start to understand it, you can actually see how things are working, and it becomes much, much easier. In fact, this exact example is what I made for myself when I was trying to understand how things work. This is an actual example that I came up with after, I think, a couple months of learning Houdini, and I was still confused about it. So you're doing a good job. If even if they don't make sense right now, it's gonna sink in. You shouldn't worry about it. And as I mentioned, you can actually see these arrows pointing to your nodes, which mean and they mean that you have some dependency here. So essentially, if we're trying to analyze it, it means that these two objects depend on this control. Something from this control is controlling them. All right. Had to take a water break. So what are we going to do? Let's look at things in a logical way. I'm trying to take my sphere and I'm trying to put it on top of this torus. So what is it that I'm trying to control here? Because I have controls over the radius for both the torus and the sphere. So what I'm trying to do is actually figure out where this sphere is supposed to be. And the movement is always going to be in the y direction. So I don't need to worry about x and z. So the next parameter that I need, the next control that I need, is actually going to be my center, where I'm trying to put the center. So I'll go to my control, hit this gear, and I'm going to come here. I need another float. I'll paste it there. And I call this one move up. Very simple. Hit apply, and now I have this move up in here. I'm gonna come here, I'm gonna copy this parameter, go to my sphere and paste it where center is. So now it's saying it's looking outside itself in the control node and move up. And now if I come to this merge and play with this move up, as you can see, I'm bringing my sphere up and down. Okay, things are actually getting better now. So I have some sort of control over the placement. I have some sort of control over the sphere's radius, over the torus's radius. And if I can figure out a way to link all these parameters together, I've resolved this. Essentially, what I'm trying to do is find a logical relationship between these parameters down there, so sphere radius, torus radius, and my move up, because I want to be able to dial this move up based on these two values. I don't want to actually control this move up. I want Houdini to calculate the distance based on this value, the sphere's radius and the radius of the torus. So this is where things get a tiny bit difficult, and we're gonna have to talk about Pythagorean theorem. So if you're not familiar with Pythagoras, he came up with this formula, and it talks about the triangle. I'm pretty sure if you took a course at high school, you've seen this, but just to reiterate, C, or our hypotenuse, and these names are so difficult for me to pronounce because I'm so used to the Persian version of them, and since you're watching my video, I'm gonna also sometimes use the Persian terms. So in Persian we call this whole thing Fisagures. I know it's probably difficult to pronounce, but in Persian we call this Qaziye Fisagures. If I have any Persian viewers, I'm trying to make things a little bit easier for you, because back when I was learning, I was like, what the hell is a hypotenuse? So in Persian we call it vatar. We have hypotenuse, which is this one, C, and then we're coming up with a formula to calculate this length. So we have A to the power of 2 plus B to the power of 2 is equal to C to the power of 2. And a very simple example is if A is 3 and if B is 4, C is going to be 5. So the square root of 3 to the power of 2 plus 4 to the power of 2 is 5. And we can actually reverse this formula. And Google is awesome because Google is actually showing us what we should do. So right now the formula is actually based on the hypotenuse, but we can actually change it to be A. And now when we're calculating for A, it's saying, hey, let me just remove these two values. So A is equal to the square root of C to the power of 2 minus B to the power of 2. This is a pretty basic formula. You kind of have to remember it. There are solutions for proving it, which if you go to the images section, you can actually see like the most famous one, which is based on the area. So the area of this thing and plus this rectangle, these two rectangles together, is going to be equal to this one. This is essentially the way you can prove it, but we're not going to really worry about it right now. Just know that the hypotenuse to the power of 2 is equal to A to the power of 2 plus B to the power of 2, which is what we have in here. And if you want to calculate C, you're gonna put a square root on top of it. And we're gonna take a look at our shape and decide what exactly are we trying to solve here. And then based on that, we can actually adjust the formula. So it's either gonna be this one, or it's gonna be the A leg, or it's going to be B, which is actually the same formula. It's just we're switching A to B. So no need to worry about that. Okay, so we're at our shape. And now a note that I'm going to use to actually visualize things a little bit easier for myself is actually a clip note. And by default, it's clipping in this direction. If I move it up and down, when I hit enter, you can actually see that the procedure, what's happening. So I'm just gonna come here, hold down Control, and move this. So if I don't hold down Control, I'm actually getting all these angles, which is fine, and you can just set it wherever you want. And you can see that this is the direction. So we don't want 0 in the Y direction, and we want -1 in here. So this is one way of adjusting it, but an easier one, if I set everything to the base form, is just holding down Control and just moving things around, and you can see what we're doing. So this makes it a little bit easier for me to see things. And then I'm going to switch my view to 3 to look at the front, and this way I can actually see everything in the same place. So this is my shape, and if I bring the frequency up a tiny bit, so let's just set this one to be, I don't know, like 16, and for Taurus as well, let's just set it to be, I don't know, 32 and 64. So we have maybe 128. Maybe that's too much. Yeah, 64 is enough. So I'm just trying to visualize everything the way they are in my case. All right, give me 1 second to open Epic Pen. There we go. And I need to ignore the download for the time being. All right, so I'm switching to my pen tool, pencil, and I also have to use my graphic tablet because I want to be able to actually draw things here on my screen. And let's actually draw some stuff. So this is the center of this circle. And by the way, when I say circle, this is one circle, this is another circle. I'm just trying to come up with something based on these two circles. So do things. This would be the center, this circle, and 0.000 is going to be another point for us. So we can actually see that we have a triangle, and I can just connect them together, get this shape, and we can do this whole thing in here. So if I bring Google up here, put it on the side, I actually have the same triangle. So I can use this and name things. Okay, cool. So let's just name them. In our case, this is C, this is A, and this is B. All right. So same namings as the one that we have on Google. Obviously, the lengths are different now, but the general orientation is the same thing. So we know that C is equal to square root of a to the power of 2 plus b to the power of 2. But this is not what we're trying to calculate, actually. What we're trying to calculate is moving up. And in our case, isn't a actually the move up? Because if a is equal to 0, then our sphere is sitting literally at the world space at 0, 0, 0. And whenever I bring it up and down, I'm actually adjusting a. You can actually see it in here. So remember this value, 0.78. If I set it to 0, sitting at 0. If I bring it up, I'm adjusting my a. So by default, I had 0.78, I think, in this case. Yeah. So we're trying to calculate a, which makes things super easy, because we just need to adjust our formula. So we're trying to calculate a, and we know a is equal to a square root of c to the power of 2 minus b to the power of 2. All right, now we made some progress. So we just need to calculate these two values and then we're done. Okay, let's take a look at our parameters, what we have in the sphere and in the torus. I'm gonna start drawing on the screen again. And for this one, let's just, first of all, I need a little bit more space in here, so I'm just gonna remove these guys. Select the red one, probably is easier to see, and put the names again. So I guess I didn't really have to do that. Yeah, let's rename things again. So we have C. I just want a little bit more space in here for names. Okay. A is the one that we need. We don't have this value, we are looking for it. Do we have B though? Well, if I take a look at my actual object in the control panel, whenever I'm adjusting this value, and let me actually bring things up as well, mouse. So as I'm adjusting this value, you can actually see that I'm adjusting B. The first radius in the torus is actually the value B, because in my new torus, the one I have right now, if I draw it, this is this value right here. Let me draw it real fast. So now this is my new. Oops, I have to select the pen. So now this is my B, and as you can see, whenever I play with this value, I'm adjusting my B. So I don't need to worry about anything. I just need to set this, use this value. So I'm going to write it on the screen, and I'm going to call it the same way that we called it in here. So what's the name? In my case, I'm calling it rad underline torus. And there's an X at the end, which shows that this is X, and this is going to be rad underline torus Y. If I hover in here, you can see rad underline torus Y, rad underline torus X. So the first one is rad underline torus X. So let's just write that on the screen. So rad underline underline. Torus X. Okay, we made some progress. Now we have this value. So the next one I'm trying to calculate is C. And if I look here, if I separate these two values, so isn't this the actual radius of my sphere? And isn't this one the other radius that we have for our torus? In fact, if I adjust it, you can actually see that I'm adjusting the other value. 0.15 is actually giving me this one. So the second radius in my torus is this part of C, and the actual sphere radius is the other one. All right, we're pretty much at the end. I just need to say, hey, this section is rad underline torus y, and this section I've called it rad underline sphere. All right. Okay. Now, do we have everything that we need to just calculate this? We have the C, and also we have B, and we just need to bring all of them to the power of 2 and then do a square root, and we're done. So we literally just have all the data that we need. Let's write the formula for ourselves so it's a little bit easier to see it. I have A, which is my X, which is the one I'm looking for. Now we know that we need this square root, and I'm just going to extend it here because I know it's going to be big. And we know that the actual formula is C to the power of 2 minus B to the power of 2. Okay, so do we have all these values? Yes. We have radius underline sphere, and we have radius underline torus y. So if we add these two values together, whatever parameters they are, if we add them together, they're actually going to be C. So I'm going to write it in here. Rad underline sphere plus rad underline torus y, and then I need to take it to the power of 2. So power of 2, and then minus, and I have torus x, which rad underline torus x, which is itself. So minus rad underline torus to the power of 2, and we actually didn't need this cat line. Oh, it actually moves everything. Yeah. So this is our formula. This is exactly what we need. This thing is bothering me. I don't like it that long. Let me just, and there we go. Now it's nicer. All right, so we have everything that we needed. We have our formula, we have all these data, so we just need to write it down. So what are we trying to actually adjust here? Isn't it move up? This is the one, this is A, isn't it? Okay, so let's just adjust it. So in order to do an easier job in here, I can actually just hit Alt and E to get this window. This window pops open and you can adjust things in here. Sometimes I do things like this. The only issue is that you don't get the Houdini suggestions, and since this is our first time doing this, I'm actually going to write it in here, but usually that one is just easier. And now, as you can see, when I'm extending it, things are getting in the way. So let's right click on our control, go to parameters and channels, and hit parameters ... and it will give us an exact copy of our parameters, which is a floating window, and I can just put it down here because I want to be able to adjust things as I want. These two windows, the parameters and this one, are exactly the same thing. The only difference is if I actually move somewhere else, for example, if I select this merge node, torus, I'm actually seeing the torus, but this one is always linked to control, so I don't even need to worry about anything. All right. This will always show us this particular null. And if I click in here, I actually see what this expression is evaluating to. So 0.78 is itself an expression, and it's equal to 0.780000000003, which is the precision for Houdini. So I'm trying to write an actual expression in here, H script, and this H in here shows H script. You can actually switch to Python, but don't do it now. Just use H script because it's just easier. And when you click here, H script expression language, which is what we're working with right now. If you actually look up the reference, so H script Houdini will actually bring you to H script commands, which will show you all the different commands that you can use in H script. You have a bunch of them in here. They're not very difficult. You can just scroll here and find them. Also, what we're trying to do is very, very logical. So we can find what we're looking for pretty easily. The only stuff that we're trying to find right now is power and square root. So let's look them up here very quickly. I'm just gonna hit Control F to find in this space, and since this thing is just getting in the way for the time being, I'm gonna hide everything, and then we're gonna bring it up because we need it. So I'm trying to find power, which is not here. The reason it doesn't show it because power itself is not a function. So how can we find it? I'm just gonna start removing things, and it's still not showing it for me. Maybe I'm in the wrong section, I think. I'm not trying to find the HScript commands. I'm trying to actually find HScript expressions. So HScript Houdini expression. This one expression functions. Yeah, this is the link we're looking for. This one is just the commands that we can use there. Expression functions. Okay, so now we're trying to find power. Power by default is not going to be here. As you can see, it doesn't show up. But if I remove these letters, we have pow. And pow is the one that evaluates to power. In Persian, we call it tavan, if anyone's trying to follow along. So pow, this is the expression. This is how we're supposed to write it. We have pow, and then we have base, and then we have exponent. So 2 to the power of 3 is actually 8. If you doubt it, you can just go to Google and say 2 to the power of 3. And then Google will probably, wow, my internet is so slow today, as always. But this is just, yeah, okay, we have the calculator, and this is how you type it in a calculator, but we're not trying to do that. We're just trying to calculate 2 to the power of something. So 2 to the power of 3 is 8, which is equal to 2 multiplied by 2 multiplied by another 2. 2 multiplied by 2 is 4, multiplied by another 2 is 8. Multiplied by another 2 is 16. So 2 to the power of 4 is 16. 2 to the power of 1 is 2. So there's nothing to multiply by. 2 to the power of 2 is 4. 2 to the power of 3 is 8. Just like that. I'm pretty sure you know the what power is. And we also have square root, which, if I'm right, square root, yeah, SQRT. So this is a square root, which essentially is the exact opposite of power. So square root of 144 is 12. 12 to the power of 2 is 144. 2 to the power of 2 is 4. So a square root of 4 is 2. It's the exact opposite. So by looking at these two expressions in here and remembering how we're supposed to use them, square root of the number is going to give us what we want. So we just need to put the value inside. And then power works like this. We have the base, and then we put a comma, and then the exponent. Okay, let's just write that. So first thing I'm going to do, and let me bring my notes here. So we're gonna use rad underline sphere, add it to rad underline torus y. Now, do I have to actually type this? Well, you can do it. You can say, hey, look at the channel, and then brackets, and then inside the channel, I'm trying to look at this name, which is sphere underline rad, and then this should actually evaluate to what's it called? Rad underline sphere. Sorry. So rad underline sphere, and then we end it like this, and it is actually evaluating to the same value. But as I mentioned before, we have copy parameters, so we don't even need to write these. We just right click here, copy parameter, and then I'm just gonna paste the relative reference. Okay, so right now I'm writing look at channel rad underline sphere. For torus radius, and then by the way, we are using this quotations to indicate the name. This is a string. We're going to talk about it later, but just know that whenever we're trying to reference a name, we need to use quotations. So the next thing we're going to be using is rad underline torus y, which is this value. If you hover over here, rad underline torus x and rad underline torus y. So if I come here, copy parameter, and then go inside, now we're trying to add these two together. So I'll just type a plus, another space. You don't need to put space. I'm just doing it for making things easier to read, and then paste the relative reference. Okay. So now we're adding these two together. Next up, we're gonna bring it to the power of 2. If you guys remember from the expression, how works like this. We have the base and then the exponent. Okay. What's the base? This is the base. What are we trying to do? We're gonna bring it to the power of 2. So if I put pow brackets in here, and Houdini will show us the hint. So it's saying, hey, we have a float in here, we have the base, and then we have the exponent. So just put down a comma and then type 2. So this is our C, hypotenuse. And when I hit out of it, I can actually see the value I'm trying to evaluate in here. All right, cool. We did the first section, which is the harder one. So I'm trying to subtract from this value my torus radius x, so rad underline torus x. Okay, pretty simple. I'm just gonna copy this one, come in here, hit space, and paste relative reference. Okay, so far so good. And then I'm trying to bring this to the power of 2, so pow, the name, and then a comma and 2. So this is now subtracting this value from our first one. So subtracting b to the power of 2 from c to the power of 2. And then the last thing we're going to do is square root. So square root. And as you can see, Houdini is actually suggesting it detects that we're using a script. So I hit enter, and then just put this in the brackets and hit enter. And now this sphere is sitting on the surface. Isn't that nice? Oops, I moved things. I shouldn't have done that because I wanted to be able to adjust things. See our formula. I mean, we're pretty much done with it, but moved our formula. Okay. And now we can actually just remove the board entirely. Close this one as well. Now let's just see if it's actually doing what I was expecting. Let's move things up and down. Oh, that's nice. So when I'm changing my sphere radius, it's actually automatically adjusting its position. It's always sitting on this. And if it's smaller, it's actually falling inside. Isn't that nice? And if I adjust this value, I can actually see I'm also adjusting it. If I adjust this one, I'm bringing it up and down. Everything is now working as well as I was hoping. And now this is a procedural design because it's following my instructions. Isn't that nice? Cool. Now, what I want to fix now is actually when I zoom out, I don't like that I see the surface. This one doesn't really matter, but I like to have some very, very small amount of padding between these guys, maybe like 0.01. So it's like 1 centimeter. So let's just edit the parameter interface. I'm going to bring another float. I'm going to just call this one padding. And this is like an extra layer of control that I want to have. And I want this padding to be very small. So between 0 and 0.1, not more than that. And now I'm going to come here, copy this parameter, go to my move up, add a plus, and then type paste relative reference. So I'm just adding the channel padding in here, and by default we don't see anything because it's set to 0. As I move this thing around, you can see I'm adding one tiny bit of extra control in here just to adjust things. It doesn't matter right now, but in case you want to adjust things, in case you're looking, you're trying to place things a little bit differently, you can use this for an extra layer of control. I like to set it to 0.02, and we can also go to the interface and just adjust the default value to be 0.02 as well. And this way, it's just easier to set it up and reset everything. Okay, cool. We're pretty much done with this first example. The only thing I'm gonna do, if you remember from the actual example that I showed you, I ended up clipping from behind as well. So I'm rotating things, moving it back, and I believe this was the actual shape that I had. Cool. So next up, very easy. I can just poly extrude things. Go to the viewport, just move things around. I'm actually gonna do it like this. I'm gonna hit this output back to actually get the outside, but you don't need to bring it out like this because things are intersecting. I'm actually gonna bring things inside like this because I want to avoid intersections. But now the issue is that my surfaces are reversed. Well, then just reverse it again, and it's gonna be like this, which is perfect, exactly what we were looking for. Isn't that nice? And in the value, you could actually also create another parameter in here just to essentially calculate this distance. And this is one way of doing it. Another way is actually coming here and just bringing this reverse right here. So I'm reversing it first, and then now when I extrude things, as you can see, the negative value is wrong. So I like to keep things on the positive side because it's just easier to understand, and now I'm reversing it before doing that. So just to reiterate, I have my clip. If I don't reverse my surface, things are intersecting. If I reverse it, they're actually not intersecting. As simple as that. And then you could go to your control, add a parameter interface, just bring a float, call this one I don't know, extrude. Apply, accept, and then we can just copy this parameter, go to poly extrude and paste the relative reference. So now when I move things around, you can see I'm adjusting things, but it's going to 10, which is too big. We don't want that. I actually want smaller values. So between, let's just say 0.01 and 0.1. And in here, I'm also just gonna give it 0.1 maybe. Let's just see how big that one would look. It's actually too big, so maybe a good value is 0.05. So let's just give 0.05 as the default value. And then I'm done with my base shape. Now, in order to make things nicer, make the geometry better, I can actually do a couple of stuff. One concept in Houdini, which is super cool, and I personally use it like literally every day because it's just so awesome, is VDBs. We can convert everything to a VDB, and when it comes to geometry, we call it signed distance field because we have a surface, and then we have plus and we have minus. So this is your surface, and we're essentially calculating the distance from the surface. And if we're outside, we're going to call it positive. If we're inside, we're going to call it negative. I know this is confusing, and there are a bunch of tutorials out there which you should watch if you want to fully understand it right now. But we're going to cover it in a little bit, maybe in a couple of weeks, because VDBs deserve their own session. But for the time being, if you are curious, you can actually go to Peter Claes's channel, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing his name right. I believe I am. And if you scroll down here, you can find SDF, understanding the SDF, and then there are two other videos, which is this is the first part, the second part, and the third part, and these two are examples. He goes through a bunch of stuff, and he explains the SDF very well. So if you want to learn it, you can just do it right now, or you can wait for a couple of weeks, and we're going to cover it in this course. For the time being, just know that you can actually turn things into VDBs, and one way that we use them is for merging things together. So I have my geometry right now, and what I'm gonna do, which is very basic, I'm actually gonna add a VDB. When I type VDB, you can actually see we have all these VDB nodes, and the one I'm looking for is VDB from polygons, which is the one that we probably use the most. I'm going to connect it in here, put the visibility flag, and as you can see, we have this weird box representation. And if you've worked with voxels before, you know what they are, but if you haven't, voxels, which is what we're calling these tiny cubes in here, and you can actually see we have a voxel size as well, are like pixels, but pixels are in an image and voxels are in 3D. So if you zoom in an image in Photoshop or any other program, you can actually see tiny boxes next to each other, and each one of them are called a pixel, and in 3D we actually call them voxel. So I'm gonna adjust this voxel size, bring it lower, and then as you can see, I'm seeing things much better. So yeah, let's just play with this value. You can see when I bring it higher, everything is just fading. So this is essentially showing us the smallest size that this voxel can have. If I want to see more, I can just bring it even lower. And right now, things are so much smoother. Maybe not in the viewport, but when you actually convert it back to a polygon, because right now these things are too separate. What I'm trying to do is actually I want to fuse everything together, and I want to make it sort of an organic shape. So I'm going to give it 0.01, which I think is a good value. I'm going to put down a smooth SDF, not VDB smooth, VDB smooth SDF, because as I mentioned, we're working with a signed distance field. The difference, we're going to talk about it later. Just know that if it's a surface, if it's actual polygon before that, and we're trying to affect that, we're going to be using a SDF. It's a signed distance field, but it can actually be a volume, which we're calling it density, and it's going to be just a normal VDB smooth. Again, maybe confusing, just ignore it for the time being. Just know that we can use this VDB smooth and smooth things out, and as you can see now, things are much nicer. So let's just convert it back to polygon. So convert VDB and just check polygons, and now we actually have our geometry. Isn't that nice? And if you come to your control, you can actually adjust the radius, and things might take a little bit longer, but this is just so nice. We are actually seeing this object and everything is fused, and maybe you want to print this object as with a 3D printer, which should definitely work. You can come in here before this VDB smooth and actually add a VDB reshape. And reshape SDF is, did you see the difference? It's just reshaping it. So if I come here, if I go to my VDB reshape, it's actually expanding it. It's dilating it. I can play with this offset and it's making things bigger, or just not doing anything when it's set to 0. I can bring it to erode, which is gonna make things smaller. This is a really nice note. I tend to use this a lot. I just convert things to polygon. I reshape it to make them a little bit bigger, and then I add VDB smooth to smooth them out. So this way I'm mostly preserving the volume of my object. We don't have it, as you can see, it's actually much smaller. And if I compare it to my actual object, without it, it's literally sitting inside, which is not nice. I want to actually see what I had. So yeah, just add this reshape, and as you can see, things are now kind of in the same place. Maybe a little bit smoother in here, which is very nice, definitely what I was looking for. And most of the time, it's even perhaps a little bit too big compared to our object. So you could just smooth it even more. Just bear in mind that the more you smooth, the slower that this process is gonna get. VDBs are relatively fast. I mean, definitely compared to like volumes, they are very fast, but still, as you can see, we have a lot of geometry in here. In fact, if I right click, middle click here, I have 65,000 points, where in the original one, I only had 3,000. Well, obviously, this is not very good if you're trying to keep things on the minimum size. But if you can actually afford it to make things denser, add resolution to them, if you're specifically not designing things for games, if you're trying to render something offline, this is definitely the way to go. And Houdini actually is very nice and has remesh to grid, which is a built-in node. And when I put the visibility flag in here, I can actually see it's kind of similar. Of course, the resolution is very high. So if I bring it to 0.01, oh, things are actually kind of similar. So let's just dilate it. So 0.01 maybe. The only reason this one the values are different compared to reshape, and reshape is like this because we're not using world space units. Right now we're just doing things relatively compared to our size, and if I change that, things will be changed again. Just know that they're using the same operation in here. Dilate and erode is the same thing in here, dilate and erode, just using world space because this node doesn't exactly know your world size, so it's just doing it based on the actual world. It doesn't know this division size, which is the exact same thing as your voxel size. And then also let's just smooth it out a little bit, so when we compare things, they're actually pretty similar. Let's just set it to 4, and they should be very similar. Obviously there's some minor difference between them, especially when it comes to dilating. We also have to kind of adjust it. Maybe 0.01 and 4 is going to be equal. It's kind of equal. It's using some different operations. If you allow it, right click and hit allow editing of content, you can actually jump inside and see that, oh, there's actually VDB nodes inside. We have VDB from polygons, we have VDB reshape, we have VDB smooth. It's literally the same thing. We are just using the same operations. Just Houdini packaged everything up very nicely for us, so we don't need to wire these nodes back to back. It's the same workflow, just easier. So if VDBs are confusing, just use remesh to grid until we actually get to the VDB topic, and then you can just fully understand what's going on. All right, so this was the first part of our tutorial. Let me check the timing. I've been speaking for about 1 hour and 15 minutes, 10 minutes almost. I'm gonna give myself a little bit break. Obviously you won't see it because I'm just gonna pause my video. I will be back probably in like 5 minutes to talk about the burger setup. And I kind of have to be faster because I don't want to make it too long, but the burger setup is very fun, and I think it's a good start to actually do some simulations in our scenes, get comfortable with Houdini, and it's just all around a very nice setup. I will be explaining some parts of it, and then if it's just the same operation, I'll just copy it over from my scene files. You can obviously follow along with the scene files or just make things from scratch. See you in a second. All right, so the burger setup. Let me show you the scene files for the burger setup. So we have this nice looking burger, and what we're gonna do today, let me actually jump inside. And as you can see, the tree might actually looks a little bit intimidating at first, but if I zoom in here, and the reason why I'm zooming, because if you want, you can just even skip this part, because the operation themselves are very, very easy. And this is sort of to recap what we did last week, which I think it's nice to actually do things like this. So we will do some recap for last week. We will recover everything that we did. We'll talk about some of the stuff that we made this week, and just focus on stuff. I'm gonna skip some parts of it. For example, like this section, I'm actually using copy variants, which is a node that you can download from my Gumroad page for free. I put so much time into this node, and I'm very proud of it because it makes things so much easier. But we're not going to cover it right now. It's very simple. I might even show it, but we're not going to worry about things. We're going to do some very, very basic instancing. We're going to actually do a soft body simulation, which I think is very nice. But we're not going to really worry about these kind of things. This is just a simple example to show you that even right now you can make some really cool stuff. We're not going to be really referencing things similar to what we did right now, but if you want, you actually can. We have very, very simple reference right now in here. I'm just copying this value, putting it there, just to make sure things are always going to stay. They're not going to be a rectangle, always going to be very equal. But yeah, let's just set it up. And also, as I mentioned, you can also see the materials if you take a look at the scene file. Let me adjust my monitor real quick, make sure I have everything in here. My video is recording and things are looking good. I'm just going to come out here. I'm going to uncheck this geo, down another geo, call this burger. Select everything, holding down A, drawing a line to do a quick layout. I'm gonna jump inside the burger and we're gonna start modeling. So I'm gonna start with a simple circle. So placing a circle, I'm setting the orientation to ZX. Divisions 64 I think is good. Maybe we can also even increase it to like 1 to 8. Should be fine. I'm gonna reverse it because I like to actually see the top surface when I'm here. And then I'm just gonna add a poly extrude. So in the poly extrude, I'm gonna hit enter. I'm just gonna drag in the viewport to actually adjust this distance. Something like this is good. Maybe actually 1.0.15 is exactly the value I used in my scene. Looking down, you actually see that we have a holder, so output back. Don't forget that. And then I'm actually gonna play with this inset. So if you hit enter in the viewport, you have the controls down here as well. And if you scroll, you're actually adjusting your inset. You can see that the inset is moving, and left click, as I mentioned, is adjusting our distance. So I'm gonna put it to maybe 0.15. Maybe it's too much, maybe 0.12. Yeah, something like this is better. And now what I'm trying to do is actually I want to extrude this surface on top. So one thing that I can do is add another poly extrude, go to this pick in here, so select the geometry, select the surface, hit enter. Now I can just hit enter and adjust it, and it is working. But let's do it in a procedural way. So poly extrude can actually put a bunch of groups for us. Poly extrude can create them, we can adjust them, we can move them up and down, and we can use them for movement. So let me just clear here. We're not playing with any of these values. Go back to poly extrude 1, and in order to understand what these groups are, I'm actually gonna check this thing down there to display groups and attribute lists. Okay, so let's put the front, back, and side. As you can see, very easy, and it's actually showing it based on color. So this is extrude back, this side. This is extrude side, which is the side of our object, and the top, which is being created by the object by this poly extrude, is extrude front. And as you can see, extrude front is the one that I was trying to adjust. So let's just uncheck everything. I just need front group. So in here, in the second one, I'm actually gonna go up into group section. I'm actually gonna load extrude front. And now when I adjust this, you can see that I'm always adjusting extrude front. So no matter what I have, if the Houdini detects extrude front, I'm gonna be extruding it. This is proceduralism. We are giving it a name. This name is always there. If I change my object, for example, let's say I have a sphere. So I'm just gonna be extruding this particular sphere. And let's just, for the time being, set this to individual. So we are actually extruding each individual polygon in here. Let's just bring it to like 2 so it's easier to see. And since we're insetting it, it looks a little weird, but I'm gonna bring it to positive. And now when I go to the other one, I'm extruding this side. And as you can see, I'm only extruding the front. Just another example of showing. I'm just going back to bring everything to where we had it. We don't need the sphere. Okay, we're bringing this thing up. Now I'm trying to create a shape of a burger. So poly bevel is actually quite helpful in here. I'm gonna add a distance of maybe 0.03, let's say. Maybe it's actually not good. Let's bring it 0.075, maybe something like this. Yeah, and then let's just add divisions to it. There we go. And as you can see, things are weird. But if I go to exclusion, ignore flat edges, and then just bring it up to maybe like 5. There we go. Now things are very smooth. And we don't care about the groups anymore, so I can just hide it. All right, so we recently talked about VDBs. Now we can do the whole VDB workflow. So VDB from polygons, VDB smooth, and then we convert VDB. Or I can just put remesh to grid. For the time being, let's just use remesh to grid. And then I'm just going to use the division size of 0.01. Maybe it's too much. Let's just use 0.02. I think that's better. Yeah, let's just use 0.02. I mean, in my example, I'm using 0.01, but 0.02 is actually pretty good. And then I'm just gonna smooth it Maybe 0.01 with the smooth would work better. Maybe. Let's just leave it at what it is right now, but you could just bring it a little bit higher if your PC is slowing down, or if you just don't need all this resolution, which we don't, but you know what, let's just keep it as is. So the mountain node, we've talked about it before. The mountain node can add noise to our object, and for the time being we're just gonna use a very simple value. We're just adding noise to this, creating a mountain look, but we don't need this big value. I'm actually gonna use 0.025, very small. And in the element size, when I adjust it, as you can see, I'm making the elements smaller or bigger, so 0.75 worked for me. And this is a nice shape, and this is gonna be our bun. So let's give it some color. The exact values that I'm using for this color, I'm just gonna copy it from this side because I know the code. So this would be the color code. So I'm just using this color. You can pick whatever you want. In fact, you can just kind of round these things up. Oops. Yeah, 0.72, and also 0.45, something like this. In fact, also 0.75. I like round numbers. And I want to give it a name. I'm gonna give it a group in case I want to use this data later on, and I'm just gonna call this one bun. Okay, cool. This is my bun. And next up, I'm actually gonna create the meat. So the general workflow is actually the same thing. The only difference is I'm not gonna extrude it twice. I'm just gonna extrude it once. So rather than doing that, I'm just gonna copy this thing, bring it over here, and then just adjust things. So this one is working, this one is working. When I extrude it up, I don't want any groups. I don't want to do anything later either, and then I don't need any inset. So yeah, just like this, and that's good. And then a bevel. The bevel value is too much, so 0.05 would be better probably in this case, maybe even 6. There you have it. Remesh to grid. Maybe even bring this value a little bit higher, so maybe 0.2 I think is good. Yeah, this one is nicer. So you also have some room for this bevel as well, maybe 0.07 or even 0.08. If you want, you could actually take the value from this node. So hit copy parameter, go to your poly bevel, paste it in the distance. So now we're putting the exact value there, but I don't want that. I want to divide it by 2. So I get this, but my lines are still intersecting here. I have actually 2 lines in here. If you bring the point numbers on, you can actually see they're intersecting. So if I multiply this by a very small number, so let's say 0.9, I should actually be able to free everything in here, maybe even 0.8. And rather than using divide by 2, I can actually say multiply by 0.5, which might make it a little bit nicer to read. It's going to be the same thing. And now, depending on this value, the distance, you can actually see things are adjusting. Again, proceduralism. So remesh to grid, mountain, add colors to it. Let's just add the meat color, I guess, which in my case I'm using 0.3, 0.22, and 0.13. Yeah, this is nice. And then let's just adjust these a tiny bit. Maybe we'll get something nicer. Yeah, 0.22 was fine. All right, yeah, this is pretty good. And this is gonna be called meat. Cool. As you can see, everything is very, very fast. So next up, I'm actually trying to create the cheese. So for cheese, very easy. We have the grid. Why not just use the grid? I'm gonna make it much smaller. So this is my grid, and if I want to adjust it, I can either middle mouse click in here and just adjust things. I don't like using the middle mouse in here. I kind of want to just type the value that I want, and I want this side to automatically adjust. So just copy parameter, paste relative reference. Now they're linked together, so whatever value I put in the first one, it will adjust. So 2, in my opinion, is very good. Now what I'm gonna do, is same as we've been doing here. I'm just gonna extrude it and add some bevel to it. So why not just copy both these nodes? I'm holding down Alt and dragging to copy. And as you can see, they are actually preserving their link. You can see we have the dependency. So depending on the value we're putting, this is obviously a very thick layer of cheese, which we don't like that. Let's bring it down to 0.04. So 0.04. This is nice now. Okay. So again, remesh the grid. Why not? Let's just remesh it. Let's get more polygons in here. And now as you can see, everything is fading because our values are not very good. We need to readjust them. So 0.01 in here, and then we don't want to smooth anything. Okay. Now as you can see, we have so much more resolution. Now we might be able to adjust this smoothing to like maybe 1. 1 is enough. We don't want anything more. But now I know later on I'm gonna use vellum. And this is something that you should know. Vellum prefers triangles when it's solving. Obviously, I'm gonna make everything into a triangle later on. But just this one, we could remesh it right now. Now we don't have to, and I'm not gonna do it in this case because we don't need it. But one thing that you can do if this resolution is too much, because everything now is just so high res, you could actually start remeshing in here as well. Obviously, we're adding noise to it, so it will affect it. But for the cheese, we're not gonna add any noise. So why not remesh? There's no noise to be done, and as you can see, this is very rough. So maybe a value of 0.015 in the target size would be good for us. Something like this. In fact, this might actually be more high res than our original object. So we have 40,000 in here. We had 81,000. Okay, yeah, it's still much better. But if you want, you can continue to adjust until you have a value that you like. I like 0.015. I think it's a good value. I'm pretty happy with it. So let's add color. So the color of cheese. Let's just pick the yellow, and this is a very ugly yellow and I don't like it, so I'm gonna adjust it a tiny bit, and rather than using 1 in here, I'm actually gonna use 0.7. Now this looks like a nice cheese. And then let's add a group. Obviously we don't need these colors, but I'm just adding them for myself when I'm trying to see things. So this is the layer cheese. All right, next up I'm gonna add some bacon. So the bacon part is actually where things get a little bit interesting, and this is something new that we haven't been doing. So we're gonna instance stuff. So I'm gonna use planar patch, which is a nice node which will always give us everything in a triangle form, and it will always give us a grid. It's similar to using grid and then remeshing the grid. You can also just do that. Just remesh the grid and you get this. Planar patch will always just do that sort of by default. You can set it to be ZX, and in the size section I'm using 0.5 in here and 1.5 in there, and same resolution. I think 0.1 in the edge length is actually fine. If I bring it lower, we can actually see it's we have more resolution, but 0.1 worked for me. I don't have any issues. So I'm trying to copy this because in the end my final simulation is gonna be something like this. So let me actually show you what we're trying to do. And it is cooking on my end because I made the mistake of closing this file before recording, so I have to wait. It was pretty fast. So this is the simulation that we're trying to create. It's just a burger falling down. Our ingredients are falling on top of it. And yeah, this is literally just a very, very basic simulation. Soft body. And like our final would be this one, the point deform, which is actually like the exact thing we're gonna get out of it, which is much nicer. And as you can see, we have much higher quality in here, better details. Don't worry about them right now, but for the time being, just know that this is what we're trying to do. So our initial shape needs to be like this. We need to have layers on top of each other. So we need to have a bunch of bacons. All right. Let me fix everything on my second monitor. 1 second. All right. Now, in order to do that, one thing that I can do, I can just add a box, and I can use the scatter node to add a bunch of points to it. So type a scatter, and we have 1,000 points. I don't need 1,000. I just I think I need like 10, maybe even less, depending on what you're trying to do here. I even lower. I can go with like 6. Yeah, 6 is fine. And then very really basic thing is that you can just copy both of them and copy this object to these points. If you come from Cinema 4D, I think it's called a cloner. In Maya you have mesh. In Blender I'm sure there's something else. I don't have a lot of experience with Blender, but it definitely has its own modifier or whatever it's called. But yeah, in here we have copy to points, and now we're copying these pieces of bacon to this box, and it's working, but it's very boring. So I'm just gonna hit enter while I'm selecting box, and my output flag is actually on the copy to point, so I can see the boundary of the box, and I can just hold down shift and adjust it in both sides, adjust the actual box. So if you don't hold down shift, drag it, you're going in one direction, hold down shift, drag it, you're going in both directions. And this is a much nicer looks. Let's say 1.5 in there, maybe make it a little bit bigger, and also a little bit bigger. So now we're scattering things, and it is working. But one thing that you can do is, right now we're scattering on the surface of this box. If I template it, you can see that everything is actually sitting on this surface. What if I want to put things inside? Well, there's a node called ISO offset, and it will turn your object into a volume. Very simple, very basic. Again, volumes are not part of this course right now in this section where we are, but it's a very easy technique. So ISO offset, and then bring the uniform sampling division up to maybe like 50 to get a more exact shape. And then we are scattering inside. As you can see, when I go to the top view, this is the boundary of my object, and things are actually inside. Very cool. So now I'm scattering things inside. Now there are concepts that right now we're not familiar with, and the reason why we're not, because I've chosen to kind of not talk about attributes right now, even though they are a core part of Houdini. And when we actually even middle click in here, you are going to see some attributes. Attributes are extremely important, but they can be difficult. So we're trying to postpone it as much as we can. And in order to just get something very basic in here, I'm just telling you, in order to affect our orientation, we need two vectors. We need up and we need forward. So we need a direction that will show us where up is, and we need a direction which will show us where forward is. So by default, we're going to assume up is Y. So let me draw. So we're going to assume that this is up, and forward will be the Z direction. So, oops, wow, this is so crooked. And this would be our forward. Now in Houdini, we will name this forward actually N. We will use N and up. These two attributes go together whenever we're trying to instance things. When you get to more advanced stuff, you actually have other concepts like quaternions, and then you have the orient attribute, and then you can use matrices or do quaternion functions and then just calculate orientation based on that. We're not going to touch on that right now. Let's just use up and N. We have two very simple vectors, and then they're making this angle, so 90 degrees angle between them. All right, so let's just define them very quickly. And for the purpose of this course, again, let's just assume that this is something basic right now. Let's just do it to get something cool out of it, because I want you guys to be able to create something that you can say, yeah, I made something cool. But we're going to talk about them much more in depth later on. For the time being, I'm just going to create an attribute with attrib create. Right now, as you can see, even the orientation right now is fine. So you don't even have to do it if you think it's too much. Just stop. If you're not following me, just don't worry. But I'm trying to essentially randomize this orientation. I don't want everything to just be standing straight like this. So there's a randomize node in Houdini, attribute randomize, and I'm just going to come in here. By default, it's set to work on CD. I don't want to work on CD. I want to work on up. And then I'll just select the direction or orientation type. I will enable cone angle. In the direction, as I said, this is up. So 0, 1, 0, and then just ignore this other 0. And playing with this, we are actually affecting our up right now. But we're not seeing anything because we don't have normals. So I'm just going to hold down Alt and drag another version out of this node. I'm going to call it N, and I'll do the same thing. So now when I affect things, I'm actually seeing some results. This one is not really working for me for up, but for N, I'm actually adjusting things. I am seeing something. As you can see, when I play with it, the orientations sometimes get weird. Like right now, the cone angle for up is also affecting things, but for N, it's much better. When we get to Vex, we are gonna build everything from scratch, and then you will understand why they're behaving like this. But for the time being, I'm just gonna bring this cone angle for up to 0, so it's just standing up. And then for N, I'm adding some cone angle rotations in here, so up to 180, which means we have just different angles in here. And we can also turn off this annotation on screen. Right, so these are our bacon, and then you can go to scatter and just play with this seed to get something different. Also, your randomizers have seed, so you can go to this option and just play with this global seed. So you get different randomizations. Obviously, right now for this up, we're not really randomizing anything, but you could do it if you want, and then you can adjust it later. All right, for the time being, this is fine. Again, this is not the best way to approach instancing, but we have separate sessions for instancing. And even if you're more curious, you can actually take my course at Houdini School called Variants, which like the whole thing is about copying. So you have like a full course for it. But for the time being, let's just stick to what we have right now. Now let's just move on. I'm gonna add a mountain in here to create the shape of a bacon. Very basic bacon, but it looks kind of fine. So let's just leave it at that. I'm gonna actually extrude things right now. So poly extrude, and then just drag things out. Maybe 0.2 would be a good value. 0.02, yeah, something like this. And then output back. Don't forget that, otherwise your shape will be actually empty. And again, we need this remesh to grid because we want to get some nicer shapes out of it, and we don't want any sort of smoothing. The resolution is very, very coarse. So how can we fix this? Well, first of all, you can bring this resolution down to 0.005 and then start just smoothing it out. One thing that I would recommend is actually adding to this poly extrude in here, because right now 0.02 is a little bit too small in this case, it seems like. 0.04 maybe would be better, and we can actually detect the mesh down there. So maybe play with the smoothing. If you're getting good results, then leave it at what we have. If you're not, go back up here, maybe adjust things. Maybe go back to your mountain, bring the amplitude down. If it's too much, you can just easily adjust things until you're satisfied with what you're seeing. So this is our basic bacon. And then I'm gonna add a color to it and a group. So let's just copy both these two guys in here. Color value, you can just come here and pick something. I have a value that I liked, so 1 in there, 0.33 in there, and 0.21. I like this color, and then we could also kind of round things up to 0.2 and then 0.3. This should be also nice. We're seeing this sort of lines in here happening, which actually do kind of resemble bacon's texture. But if you don't want to see that, you can either play with this division size, play with the smoothing, play with this distance, so maybe 0.06 to give yourself a little bit more room for smoothing things out. kind of like this, which is also nice. I'm pretty happy with this. Let's just leave it that. And then in the group, I'm gonna call it bacon. Similar to that, you can actually create pickles as well. It's literally the same workflow. So I'm just gonna copy this, call this group pickle, and instead of using planner patch, I'm gonna come in here. I know I don't need these two guys, so bye bye. And then I'm just gonna use a tube instead. So rather than using our planner patch to copy onto these points, I'm actually just gonna use a tube. And in the size, I'm using 0.25 and 0.25 in there, and in the height, I'm just using 0.065, something like this. Very basic shape. I'm just copying it on my object. Now, one thing to note is that their orientation is actually the same right now, so I might play with the global seed a little bit, and also with this global seed in the scatter. With up, we don't need to actually adjust it right now. And now things are intersecting, so just play with them until you like the look, and also it looks fine. So something like this is good. Go to remesh to grid to actually see your object. This is pretty nice. You have color. We don't want this color. We want 0.5, 0.725, and 0.4. This is kind of like a pickle color. I don't know, 0.7 maybe. You can also adjust it in here. Just play with it until you like it. And something like this is nice. I like to make things a little bit rounded. So 0.5 and 0.4. Yeah, 0.3 even. There we go. Nice colors. So last thing we're gonna do is another bun. So we kind of have the same thing. We're extruding, we're adjusting things. So I'm just gonna come to the first one and then just drag it over here with Alt. And in this reverse section, rather than insetting things like this, I'm actually going to set it to 0. So we're only extruding right now. And I'll say maybe, let's say 0.35 in this case. And then the upper one, I'm just going to actually go in. So essentially reversing what we did for the start. So rather than just extruding it, I'm just gonna also go like 0.15 in. So this would be our other bun, the one on top. And then we have this shape. Maybe we need more smoothing for it. We can also just add more bevel to it. So let's just drag and move this thing up. There we go. It's kind of better now. Maybe bring this distance down a little bit. There we go. It's nicer. And then remesh to grid, add some mountain, color, and bun. So now we have two groups called bun. And at the end, we're actually going to end up merging these together. So nothing is going to happen right now, and everything is going to be okay. And things will actually merge together pretty nicely. As you can see, we have the bun. But if you're trying to really be safe, and if you know there might be some value somewhere, so you can actually say union with existing and union with existing. This way, in case you're doing something up there which is creating another bun, it will kind of even things out, and you have just one object called bun. But it doesn't really matter in this case. It's just the same. I'm gonna skip adding sesame seeds on top, which in our case we actually have it. I'm creating some sesame seeds and adding them on top of my upper bun. I'm gonna skip that because it's not really important for this tutorial, and also I have to cover a bunch of attributes to really get into it for the randomization, and we absolutely need Vex for that. I've included copy variants in the example, so if you want to see what we're trying to do, you can check it out. And as I mentioned, copy variants is available on my Gumroad page for free. So what we're going to be doing now is actually merging things together. So we could just easily merge everything out. Now, as you can see, I just added the merge just like that, very easily. But how did I bring it? It's a shortcut in Houdini. So the stuff that I'm trying to merge, I'm just going to select all of them. I'm going to hold down Alt, and then I'm just going to drag a line. And as you can see, it's selecting everything. And when I let go, it will add merge. So you can either do it like this, or just type merge and then shift enter. it will place it somewhere in your scene, which I don't, oh yeah, it's here. So now you have to connect everything to it. We're selecting this color as well. I like to use the shortcut because it's just much faster. Also, you could just rearrange these wires however you want. I'm just adding them in order. So now in here, I'm trying to create the actual hierarchy. So there are two ways to approach this, and there's nothing wrong with either one of them. One of them is just more procedural. One of them is just easier. So the easy one would be using transform subs to actually transform things higher. So I will place the burger there, and then I will make a copy, go to cheese, bring it even higher. I can make another copy, put it on bacon. Now bring the bacon like somewhere like that. Maybe a little bit lower. Yeah. And then create another copy. As you can see, since we have the value, by default it will be the same value as there, so I can adjust it very easily. And then another one, and I'll put it on top of this bun. So yeah, like this is working right now, but if I end up making any sort of changes in here, things will break. For example, if I want to make this box bigger, which I'm adding the points to, and then I'm creating the bacons with. So if I hit like 5 in there, and now our bacons are just going crazy in the middle. So you can do it procedurally, and if you guys remember, we use the node match size, which is a really cool node. And then we're going to just do everything step by step in here. So I'm going to take this object, I'm going to put it on the ground. So add match size. I don't care about putting X and Z in the center. I only care about adjusting Y. So I'll set it to min, and now it's actually sitting on the ground. If you notice here, if I disable it, you can see that it is right now fully sitting on the ground, and before that some parts of it were actually under the ground. And then with this offset, I'm actually bringing it a little bit higher, so maybe 0.2. So now it's sitting 0.2 units above the ground. So I will copy this, bring it over here, add it to meat, but rather than adjusting it like this, I'm actually going to set it to 0. I'm going to bring the other line from my other match size, from the bun. So now, as you can see, the boundary changes because I'm actually taking the boundary of the second input into place. I'm actually understanding what's happening there. If I uncheck this, you can see nothing's happening. There are also no dependencies. If I bring this over, you can actually see that there is a dependency. So my object, my meat, is now dependent on the size of this bun. How does it depend on it? It's saying put min to same. If I put min to max, if you remember from our first session, it was all about like this one thing. So my meat is now sitting on the bun. If I merge them both together, I can see that meat is now perfectly sitting on the bun. Okay, that's great. Now we can just add a tiny offset in here. So maybe like 0.3 should be nice. And then when I merge them together, as you can see, I'm adjusting this offset in here. Set to 0, they'll be literally on top of each other. Now in this case, the meat would work, but the other stuff we actually need simulation because I want natural placement for them. So I'm just gonna put it 0.3 up. It looks nice, I think it's good. Okay, let's move on. We're gonna again take a copy of this, disconnect the lines holding down Y. We're gonna do the same thing for cheese. So connect cheese to the first input, connect what we had to the second input, take a look at it. Now it's sitting on top, just wire the match size to the end, and now we have this shape. So the cheese is now sitting on top of the meat, and now you can also adjust it. Perfect. Take another copy. Now we're going to do the same thing with bacon. So connect this in here to the first input, connect the match size to the second input, connect the original wiring there, and now you can see that bacon goes up and sits on top of our object. And the nice thing is no matter how much I adjust it, it will always be sitting on top of it, and it will always be 0.3 units above it. I can actually adjust it as well. Everything is exactly where I want them to be. So another match size, copy it, add pickle to it, match size to the second input, rewire in here, and now there we go. Pickles are sitting on top, maybe like 0.2 in this case, or even 0.1, maybe even lower, since they are actually kind of floating. We can afford to mix things up a little bit, but you might have to adjust it later. I'm just gonna leave it to 0, so it will always at least be sitting on the boundary. And then we need just to put the second bond, so just rewire to the first input and use this one as a second input, and then just add it to the end, and there we go. It's sitting on top, and maybe adjust the bond a tiny bit. So everything is now, our ingredients are looking nice. They're sitting on top of each other. What I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna do a vellum simulation. This is the first time we're doing a simulation in this course, and right now in terms of time, I'm actually almost at 2 hours, so I'm trying to make things a little bit faster. And vellum is very difficult. Well, I mean, compared to other simulation, vellum is actually very nice, but this is literally like the beginning for us. So what can we do? What can we do to make things a little bit easier? I'm gonna promise you I will come back and cover vellum later on, but I really do want us to get some output from this course even early on. So trust me when I say things will get easier. But let's just do a vellum simulation. Let's just see how things will work right out the box. And we do have to make tiny adjustments, but it's so easy you don't even have to worry about it. So I'm gonna hit tab and I'm gonna type vellum soft bodies. Okay, it will show up as vellum strut soft bodies. Don't worry about the name. Vellum soft. You can see vellum configure strut soft body. Just ignore the name, it's very long, but we have these two nodes. Let's just leave them as they are. I'm going to go to the last one, type vellum solver, and now I have a solver which is in charge of solving my simulation. I'm going to check this box where it says ground position because I want to ground, and then I'm just going to play my simulation, and it will be very slow, extremely slow, because my resolution is just so high right now when it comes to my points. And things are just gonna be super slow. I can't really see what's happening. The soft body seems way too soft. As you can see, it's just kind of exploding like a balloon. It's just so slow, I can't even see anything. So let's adjust that. Vellum is very nice. What you can do with vellum is that you can actually bring the resolution down, calculate your simulation, and then just transfer the simulation back to your original object. How can we do it? Very easily. I'm gonna add a remesh stop in here. Remesh is gonna be very slow, but it will give us something. And I'm gonna set the size to 0.05. I think 0.05 is gonna be a good value for us, which is nice. If you want things to be faster, you can actually use fast remesh from the labs tools. And the fast remesh is actually much faster compared to the normal remesh. It's still it will still take some time to calculate things, but it is definitely better than the normal remesh stop. Okay, so this is not, both versions work fine. I'm just going to leave remesh in here, and now we've remeshed our scene. Vellum really likes triangles. Also, one really nice thing is that right here, as you can see, our mesh is so dense, and when I hit this eye, you can see 300,000 points. In here, we only have 19,000 points, so it's definitely better. And also, as I mentioned, vellum really likes triangles, and especially uniform shapes like this. So everything like the triangles are kind of equal. So remeshing things for vellum is always kind of a must. You do it and then you transfer the animation back to your object. So now when I play things, you can see things are faster. But we still have this issue where it's just too soft. I don't want things to be this soft. This is still an object. I want things to collide in a better way. So I can come to my cloth. I can check my settings. The cloth section is fine for the time being. We don't need to change anything. The struts are actually the ones that are really controlling this soft body. So this stretch is set to 10, 1 multiplied by 10. I'm just gonna increase this to 100,000. And I think this is pretty much the only thing I did. I think in my original simulation, I actually brought it up to 1 million, but let's just go with 100,000 and see how it looks. And as you can see, it's actually much better. It's still a little bit chaotic for me, too bouncy. So maybe adjust it to 1 million. As you can see, the more stiffness you had, the stiffer it will get, and it's just as simple as that. Vellum is very easy, but we will actually cover it in a much better way later. And I want things to be sloppy. If you guys remember from our thumbnail, it was actually quite like the final image is very chaotic. I want it to look kind of like this. You can adjust it to be very like clean and organized. You can stitch things together, add glue to them, all sorts of stuff, but I actually like it this way. It's sloppy. And this would be our object. So you could just let it run to settle down. Something like this I think is pretty good. Obviously it needs adjustment, but general look is actually pretty nice. I like it. And I think I will stop it in here, something like this, or even just letting it run. If you want a better simulation, you should actually come in here and increase the sub steps. It will slow down your simulation. As you can see, it really slowed it down compared to what we had. But this is a more accurate simulation, and if you are working on a commercial project, you definitely need to crank these guys up, sometimes even to like 16 or something like that, which would really slow things down. But as you can see, like the difference, it's actually a different solve, because sub steps are essentially calculating simulations between frames. Don't worry about these things. Again, we'll cover it in the simulation section. So I'm just gonna bring it down to 1, maybe 2, to kind of get the best of both worlds. A little bit more accuracy and a little bit more speed compared to 3. And this is pretty nice. Like, I'm happy with it. The only thing I want to do is actually transferring the actual object. So this was my dense object with a lot of quality, and obviously in my setup I have some noise, displacement, and you could also add like the sesame seeds and whatnot. By my remesh, everything is just very low res, and they're not that nice. So what you can do, using a node called point deform, we can actually bring it back. So we're gonna put point deform. Now the first slot takes the actual geometry, so our high res geometry, which we have in here. I'm just gonna wire it in there. The second one is gonna take it actually a static version of the simulation. So this is my simulation. I'm just gonna put down a time shift, which is a node that we can use for freezing things. Control shift click in here, so it's just staying on 1, so everything is just frozen in here, as you can see. So I'll just add that to the second input, and then I will actually add the real simulation to the third input. And now visualizing it, you can see that we have our high res geo with all the noises that we had compared to the previous one, which was very low res. And now things are literally doing what we wanted them to do. So very nice. All right, now this is our simulation, and I hope you liked it. I hope you learned something. This simulation is very basic, so don't worry about it. If it's difficult to understand, please don't stress yourself out. We will talk about simulations in a more in-depth manner. We have such a long way to go. This series will probably go for about a year until we're confident in Houdini. We can use Vex, we can use VOPs. There are so many sections that we haven't even talked about. But this is a good start. So practice, and I will see you next week. Cheers, guys.